about this. We create community, use challenge as the catalyst.
The trust breeds magic.
We're going to connect on the same level.
Possibility is bigger than they imagine.
Like any experiment, the reason you do it is to learn.
Who would you be without opportunity?
The learnings of this experiment are going to be on the edge of what's possible.
Everybody!
I can do this, and it's worth doing.
This became a love for us, this place.
Awesome. I think that, let's just try this real quick. Yeah, we'll go with the keyboard. That work? It does, okay. A lot of my friends would say that I'm a contrarian. I disagree. That's not my joke. That's a good friend of mine. So I'd like to start with maybe a few confessions. One is last night wasn't very balanced for me. I was actually up until about 5 a.m. finishing a proposal. I'm done though, so now I'm fully here, but that just means I'm a little bit tired, a little bit wired. My second confession is an hypothesis that I really live by, and that's a belief that entrepreneurship is the answer to most every single issue we face today. I believe that to my core. I know it's maybe a little foolhardy, but it's sincere, and that's because where most of the world sees problems and challenges, entrepreneurs see solutions and opportunities. I think in a world with so many challenges, we need to desperately foster that level of thinking and doing. That's what I've really dedicated my life according to, and that's what I'll be talking about a little bit today. My name is Daniel Epstein. I'm founder of an organization called the Unreasonable Institute, another organization called Unreasonable Group. So before I go any further, I want to rationalize a seemingly irrational name, which is unreasonable. So this is George Bernard Shaw. He's the Irish playwright who's famous for saying a lot of things. But one of his quotes is that the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in adapting the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable person. If George Bernard Shaw is right, if all progress depends on the unreasonable person, then a world where 1 billion people live on less than $1 a day, another 1 billion don't have access to clean drinking water, in a world where preventable diseases like diarrhea kill 2.5 million children under the age of 5 every single year. If George Bernard Shaw is right, then I believe we can't afford not to bet on unreasonable people, and that's what we do at the Unreasonable Institute. So what I wanted to do is throughout this talk tell you a little bit about why we do, what we do, and then where we're hoping to go. And about half of this is stuff that we've never really shared publicly, so I hope you'll bear with me as I stumble through it. But for us, the genesis started here. So this is the University of Colorado out in Boulder. When I was planning on going to university, I had this master plan in mind. My dad thought it was foolish, I thought it was brilliant, and it was this basic idea. I was gonna go to MIT and then drop out. Assuming I could get into MIT. And the rationale there was that I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I knew I wanted to do startups. And so a diploma doesn't necessarily matter. But the University of Colorado offered to fly my mom and I out for a visit. We landed in Boulder, and who here's been to Boulder? Nice, awesome. So nice. We landed in Boulder, and after 24 hours, I knew that's where I wanted to bunker down. And all my other plans changed. I fell in love with Boulder, Colorado. And so I dove into university there. And my freshman year, I started out with math, finance, and econ. And I wanted to do startups, and I quickly realized that 3 degrees is not conducive to startups. So I dropped out of all of those, and I went into philosophy. And I studied philosophy because I didn't want to learn what to think, I wanted to learn how to think. And it was like hedonistic mind candy for me. I loved philosophy so much that meant I never actually had to go to class. Right? Because in philosophy, you turn in papers for grades. So you turn in 2 papers at the end of a semester, and that's it. So I could read and write on my own, and then in my free time, I could work on startups. But I remember going home for Thanksgiving dinner with my family, and I sit down, and my parents are like, how's college going? I said, well, I changed my degrees. And they're like, well, what'd you do? And I said, I dropped math, finance, and econ. My dad's like, He's like, well, what are you studying? I'm like, philosophy. And he's like, oh, God. And he asked me, he goes, are you going to ask me questions like, does this table exist or not? And I was studying epistemology, the study of knowledge, and that is such a good question. I'm like, Dad, that's such a good question. And he's like, but anyways, so that's where it all started at the University of Colorado. Because I was studying philosophy, what I got to do is take all my other time and work on startups. So I worked on 3 companies. My freshman year, we started 3 businesses. And for me, it was a really interesting experience. I knew I wanted to do startups. And I remember journaling one night. I was writing, and I realized that we could solve kind of any problem. Right? As entrepreneurs, we design solutions to problem sets. And I wrote out, we can choose which problem sets we want to solve. When I was 18, I wrote out, I only want to work on problem sets worthy of my life's work. Right? I could give a damn if I'm 18 years old or not. And so we jumped into the seemingly intractable problems. And so these 3 startups, 3 different teams, 3 different kind of impossible problems, we were trying to have a positive impact on the world. And I remember that how I felt was really like this. If I were to use an adjective, it was I felt like a misfit. Right? I didn't know who to hang out with because we were starting startups to solve really hard problems, but it was all about the impact. And so originally I thought that I would hang out with kind of the nonprofit or social sector. It was all about impact. And I went over there and I felt like a huge misfit. Because for me, I believe that profits are best driver for ingenuity and innovation and markets for scale. Right? So then I stepped over to the other side. I was like, well, I'll hang out with the private sector. These have to be my people. And I hung out there as a total misfit because the only thing I cared about was solving really hard problems. Profit was just the driver. And I felt like the world was bifurcated. I felt like a misfit, and this led to the genesis of the Unreasonable Institute. It was entirely selfish. It was my desire to seek refuge amongst fellow misfits. Right? Other entrepreneurs who are trying to solve seemingly impossible problems, thinking about global scale. So I think the best way to illustrate this is to talk to you about one of our misfits. This is Mishkin. Mishkin, super smart. He's born in India, grew up there, and then he went to MIT. He has 2 PhDs out of MIT. He's an incredible inventor. And when he stepped out of his second PhD, he did what most these folks did, which is he went into consulting. So he worked for McKinsey. And he was having, he had a great life. He was making a lot of money. He was solving interesting problems. He was traveling the world. He was really flourishing. But after a year, his story, he says that he felt like something was missing. And so he went to India to do something he always wanted to do, which is to get a motorcycle, ride across the subcontinent with one of his best friends. So he flies over to Mumbai, and about 2 hours north, his friend is in a small village. So Mishkin jumps on his motorcycle. He goes up to that village. And when he arrives, it's mud huts. When he arrives there, his friend just so happens to be a doctor. And he can't find his friend anywhere because somebody's having a baby. And so his friend is helping perform the birth. And so he identifies the hut where his friend's at, and he waits outside. And as his story goes, he says an hour goes by, and 2 hours go by, and 4 hours go by, and the afternoon sun's setting into the horizon. And finally, his friend walks out. Mishkin kind of locks eyes with his friends, and he sees his face just go ghost white. Right? Mishkin knows something wrong, something bad happened, and his doctor, or his friend, the doctor, looks at him and says, the mother died and the baby girl died too. And Mishkin asks, why? What happened, right? And his friend, the doctor, says postpartum hemorrhaging, or excessive bleeding caused by anemia. This upsets Mishkin a lot because he knows that anemia is very, very easy to treat, especially this specific case. What was most upsetting is to treat anemia, typically you just need a certain amount of vitamins, nutrition, or iron tablets. And what was really upsetting was a mile away, just outside of the village, Mishkin had ridden his motorcycle by a free health clinic where they were subsidized free by the government iron tablets. So the solution's a mile away, and yet this mother and her baby girl died. And so Mishkin looked at anemia and he said, well, what's really the problem here? And he decided to stop working at McKinsey and look into this. And he's not a doctor, but what he realized is that treatment's really easy. Detection is really hard, right? Because to detect anemia, you need to draw somebody's blood and you need to process it in the lab. So in places like rural India, this never happens. And when Mishkin looks at the broader picture, he realizes that anemia is the #1 killer during birth out of anything globally. Every minute, a mother and her child die. And so he looks at it and he says, I'm going to really dedicate myself towards this. Let's figure out this detection side of it. He realized that today in rural places, you have to have a specialist show up where specialists don't exist. They then have to go into market, meet these women, convince them that they should be able to draw their blood. That level of trust doesn't exist. You then have to take the blood, go back to a city, process it in a lab, 2 weeks later, come back and share your results. It just never happens. And you realize that you have to make it non-invasive. And so with this design constraint, he actually built it. He took 2 years, brought together a team of engineers, and they built this. It's called Touch HB. That little clamp, you can put it on your pointer finger, and non-invasively, no blood is drawn, but it shines a light on your finger. This light reflects and refracts off the amount of hemoglobin in your blood, and with 99% accuracy, tells you if you're anemic or not instantly on the spot. what's so cool about this. So he went to the Unreasonable Institute to figure out how to commercialize this, get this to market. A year later, the World Health Organization ranked this 6 most important innovations of our lifetime. Not of the year, but of our lifetime. So this is an example of the types of companies that we're working with. Michigan is one of the 83 misfits that we have worked with at the Unreasonable Institute. They range from prevention of honor killing in rural Pakistan to working on reintegration of Liberian child soldiers to changing how we finance solar in the United States. The common thread is all of these entrepreneurs are trying to solve what we call BFPs, which are big fucking problems. So Michigan's a great example. What we do with these entrepreneurs is we try to give them an unfair advantage is how we would categorize it. So we take about 25 entrepreneurs like Michigan, usually from about 20 countries every single year, and we fly them out to Boulder, Colorado, which is where we're still based and call home, and we put them in the same house under the same roof for 6 weeks. We want to align them with the skills, more importantly, the relationships, the mentorship, and the capital that they need to really hit scale or really get into market. What's been incredible about it has actually been the results, because these companies are solving really hard problems in markets we don't typically consider to be markets. We've seen from our graduates that after 12 months, on average, they have a 2.8 time increase in revenue, and their team size grow by 2.5 times. Our real goal is after 3 years to help them hit 10x growth, and in turn to impact 10 times the amount of lives. After 3 years, we've seen 65% of our companies do that, which to us is shocking, but a note of humility here. We don't really know what we're doing at the Unreasonable Institute. We're kind of making it up as we go. What I like to say is that, and this is an over-exaggeration and simplification, but those who can't do teach, and those who can't do or teach run accelerators and incubators, which is what we do. And that's because our job's really simple, right? Convene the world's most inspiring or aspiring entrepreneurs, match them with the mentors who've already done it, bring in the funders, and then create the conditions in which creativity, kind of uncommon, productive collisions flourish. So things like this. So that's what we do at the Unreasonable Institute, and we realized that it wasn't quite enough, though. The Institute right now, I've stepped out of operations. I'm no longer running the team. But that team is scaling. We're launching an institute in Uganda and Mexico, and we're looking to be in 50 countries with 50 institutes by 2020. So they're really scaling up. I decided that I needed to experiment a little bit more. And this summer, I really had the privilege of speaking at the UN twice for some reason. And both times, when I got on stage, called into question our paradigms for international development, because I don't think they're working as we want them to work. So in 1990, who here is familiar with the Millennial Development Goals? Half the room, maybe. So in 1990, the UN got together, and they decided to set a list of goals. There are going to be 10 goals that by 2015, so 25 years later, they wanted to achieve. The number one UN millennial goal is to half the number of people living in absolute poverty around the world. So people living on less than $1 a day. And they had all the resources when they did this. They had hundreds of billions of dollars. 189 nations signed it, pretty much every country in the world at that point in time. They have the global infrastructure, even Bono is supporting this. And the question is, what happened, right? Because this is 2015, it's 2013. So if we fast forward 23 years, have we half the number of people living in absolute poverty or not? I decided to look at the data, and it's kind of scary. This is a graph showing the percentage of population in sub-Saharan Africa living on less than $1 a day, 1990 to 2010. You see that it decreased, yes, but it decreased from 44.6% of the population to 44%. What's terrifying about this number is in absolute terms, because of population increase, this means there are 140 million more people in sub-Saharan Africa now living in absolute poverty than there were in 1990. Something isn't working. Who knows Einstein's definition of insanity? Anybody? Yes, exactly, right? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. There's something insane about our current strategy for international development and poverty alleviation. I think that at the very least, we need to experiment radically in how to go about this differently. That was the first half of this year for me and a small team and a couple misfit entrepreneurs when we jumped on this boat and we ran an experiment in transnational entrepreneurship. for 100 days at sea. We went into 14 countries. This was called Unreasonable at Sea. Our goal was, it was very unreasonable, but our goal was to take solutions that work, like Michigan's in-market, that are already impacting thousands, if not millions of lives, and experimenting taking them into new international markets. What we realized is that the only way to go to market is to actually go to market. So we try to figure out a way, how can we partner with somebody to be able to sail around the world? And we partnered up with Stanford's D School and an organization called Semester at Sea. Semester at Sea was already sailing around the world with a group of students, and so we commandeered a wing of their ship, about 50 rooms, and we sailed with them. And the route was pretty crazy. This is where we went. We started in California. We went through Hawaii to Japan. We were in Shanghai, Hong Kong, went down through Vietnam to Singapore. We were very lucky to be able to get into Myanmar, formerly Burma. Went over to India, to Mauritius, down through South Africa, Ghana. We went to Morocco, and then we went to Barcelona in Spain, and then we flew over to DC for the culmination. So it was about 40,000 nautical kilometers, 14 countries, 100 days, and there were 11 technology companies. Most importantly is this belief, and I think that should be changed. Entrepreneurship will change the world, not can. But a lot of people ask us to say, how'd you pick the 11 technology companies? And this thing was a wild experiment. We had about 9 months to pull this off. Really thought it was impossible, but we put out a call for applications, and after 4 weeks, we had about 1,000 technology companies, just shy of 100 countries apply for the program. So we had to go from 1,000 to 11, and what we did is we selected companies we believed could really change the course of history if they could scale globally, and that had relevant technologies to international markets. I think to bring light to it, the best thing to do is to tell stories. So I want to share with you 4 very quick stories about 4 of the companies we are working with. This photo represents a technology from one of our companies called Evotech. What they realize is that when you look at the world today, there are 3 billion people who don't have access to any level of surgery. Paul Farmer, one of the leaders in global health, says that surgery is the forgotten stepchild of global health and global development. And that's because when you think about surgical technologies, they're really expensive, they're really complicated, and they take up a lot of energy. So this company, Evotech, they decided, let's build appropriate technologies that have the same standards in terms of surgical procedure, but that you can make off-the-shelf components. So this is one of the first technologies. It's an endoscopy device. They produced its off-the-shelf components. You can make it in your garage today just by going to a couple different stores. It's amazing that it costs 1/20th the cost of comparable technologies. This is now in 40 different countries being used for operations effectively on the market, but it costs 5% of what comparable technologies cost. So they're trying to do this for the entire operating room. And it was really fun working with them. They're a bunch of mad scientists. The second company is called Damascus Fortune. They're based out of Singapore and out of Damascus. They found a way, I call them modern day alchemists. They found a way to capture probably our most prolific waste of our time and convert it into something valuable. So they use nanotechnology to profitably sequester carbon out of the atmosphere. What that means is they can capture carbon emissions at its point of contact with the atmosphere coming out of chimneys in industry, things like this. They then use a nanotechnology and it converts the carbon emissions into a material called carbon nanotubes. This material is a super material. It's 10 times stronger, 100 times lighter than steel, 300 times the connectivity of copper. So this material is worth a lot. They found a way to profitably make it out of carbon emissions. What's so incredible about this is the moment that you make it profitable to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere is the moment everything changes. A waste becomes a commodity. And that's what they're really trying to do. Third company, also a mad scientist. This is Cesar. He's a robotics engineer and inventor. And he was inspired by a couple of the oil spills, mainly in the Gulf, though. And when he went out after the oil spill out to New Orleans and he went out into the water to see how people were cleaning it up, he realized that it was people on fishing boats who were just kind of skimming and troughing the surface of the water. This was hazardous, this was expensive, and it wasn't very effective. And so he created a fleet of shape-shifting oceanic robotic drones that autonomously clean up oil spills. That's one of them. And so his goal is to put thousands of these onto the water. An incredible initiative, and he actually just moved his base out to China and they're scaling across a number of markets. The last one I'll tell you about is a company that uses the power of this. So a 21-year-old, he's going to university in India, and he looks at India and he realizes that only 11% of the population has access to the internet, but 88% have dumb phones, right? Just basic phones. And so they have SMS technology. And he figured, how do we give the internet to people with SMS phones? And so he launched something called iKnows. Today it's the largest offline search in the world. They have about 160 million users every single day. And what iKnows does is, it's like Google for SMS, right? So I can text his number, whatever that is. I can say driving directions from Mumbai to Chennai. And it'll send me step-by-step directions. But I could ask anything you could possibly imagine. What's amazing is, like Google, it's free. Because now he has the largest kind of targeted advertising platform in the subcontinent of India, and he knows where you are and what you're searching for. But he has effectively given free, ubiquitous access to information to people with dumb phones. And so he's looking to scale that out. And so what was really funny about Deepak is I called him 2 months before the voyage, and I asked him sincerely, I was like, why are you coming on this voyage? You have 160 million active users. You're already across a bunch of countries. You don't need this experience. And he said, well, he goes, I really want to scale into a few key markets. One of those is China. And I think this experience will really help me. I said, great. And he goes, so how long are we in China? And I kind of pause and I look at the itinerary because I didn't know. I look at the itinerary and I go, well, it's 4.5 days. And he pauses. These are his words, not mine. He goes, you know, Daniel. I go, yeah. He goes, China's a big fucking country. It's a good point. And I go, okay, I get what you're saying. And he goes, there's a couple problems. There's 2 problems with 4.5 days. He goes, the first one is I don't know who I need to meet with. And he goes, but we can overcome that. We can hustle. We can figure it out. He goes, the second problem is much bigger. Even if I know who to meet with, it's not as if they're going to be in Shanghai when we arrive. And I said, Deepak, that's brilliant. That's what we have to do. We need to host national events. So what we did is in every country, we leveraged the absurdity of what we were doing to gather the startup ecosystem of that country to show up when we arrived at port. So we'd host about 3 national events in every single port. We did just shy of 30 over the course of 100 days. And it'd bring together sometimes 1,000 people, sometimes more, sometimes a couple hundred people, but it'd be the political investment, startup engineering leadership in that country who would then rally around our entrepreneurs. But this was the first 2 days in port. And what was really important was the next experience, which is we believe that empathy builds empires in today's world, especially in emerging markets. And that the only way you can really learn is to get onto the ground, to get into the grit of it. So this is just an image of one of our entrepreneurs. They have the world's most efficient charcoal burning cook stove. This is him testing it out in Myanmar with prospective customers, actually going out into the village. And that was the bulk of our time in market. But being in market was only half the time, right? The other half of the time we were stuck and trapped on this ship. And so I think an important question is what happened on the ship. We were a mentor-driven program, so 11 technology companies, but we had 20 mentors with them. And I'll quickly show you a couple of them. One of them was not the one on the right, but the one on the left, the Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He sailed with us for 11 weeks, which is 77 days. So he got on in California, he got off in Cape Town. And I'm not making it up. This is a real photo of him mentoring one of our entrepreneurs. You can see he was a really strict mentor. But that's Tendakai from Botswana, one of our entrepreneurs. And it was incredible to have somebody like Desmond Tutu there as a mentor, as a part of the community. Another mentor, this is Matt Mullenweg. He's a hero of mine. He's the founder of WordPress. 19% of the world's websites are built on WordPress. What's really funny about Matt is I was interviewing him or talking to him, and I said, when's enough enough? And 19% of websites on the internet are WordPress. And he looked at me and he goes, enough? He goes, there's another 81%. And I was like, you're nuts. So anyways, a credible entrepreneur to learn from in terms of scaling up technology. This is Prince Fahad of Saudi Arabia. He was a mentor. He was with us for a couple weeks. He was a mentor not because he's a prince. He was a mentor because he brought Facebook into the Middle East. He was head of US Arab operations. So who better to learn from in terms of getting a technology into new markets, especially markets that could be resistant from a policy perspective. Another mentor, Megan Smith, she runs Google X. So under kind of her watch, that department has created Google Glass, the self-driving car, a number of other technologies that we don't know about. But she's really on the edge of what's possible with tech. Lastly, and we had 20 of these mentors, but another example, this is George Kemble, who's doing this. He's the co-founder of Stanford's D School, ranked best educator in creativity in the world by Inc. magazine. And him and I, you'll notice there's a lot of other people in this image. This is actually on the ship. This is really important because it wasn't just mentors and entrepreneurs. We also had 630 university students. And George and I co-taught a course on the ship. And there's 90 students enrolled. It was the largest course on the entire ship, but 300 sometimes would show up to our classes, right? So this shows that what really happened, which is George taught the courses, and I kind of sat like this and watched him in admiration. But we worked with the students in real time. We believe this is real education. It's project-based learning. Our students were working with our entrepreneurs to help them get into market throughout the voyage. Long story short, what I wanted to do is be really honest for a moment and talk about how hard this was, because this was a crazy experiment. We had 9 months to pull it off, and we felt like it was going to be impossible. So this idea of diving into things with uncertainty, I actually thought we weren't going to do this. We had these 20 mentors, 11 technology companies, but coming from all around the world, you have to get them visas into 14 countries. We had 2.5 months to get them visas, two of the hardest countries in the world, the US and China. And so we had to partner with the State Department, the highest up people there, to really make that happen. We had no funding strategy. This is probably most important. Nobody would fund this program from the start because nobody believed it was possible, including us. So we figured we have to build it and then fund it. And so in November of this past year, I was sitting with about $120,000 in debt with no way to pay it off, absolutely no plan B, and we needed to raise another $500,000 just to be able to afford the program, and the ship would set sail in about a month and a half. And so I kind of freaked out. I had this moment, and I flew out to Stanford to meet with George from the D School because him and I co-led the program. And I landed and I sit down with George and I go, George, like, we're in trouble. We have a month and a half. It's the holiday season. We need to net now about $600,000 to pay off the debt and cover the cost of the program. And I was like, I don't know how. And he looks at me and he goes, well, this should be easy. He goes, the world is infatuated with the D School because we're on the edge. He goes, this is on the edge of the edge. It's one of the most radical experiments in transnational entrepreneurship and education technology. And I said, that's great, George, but you're right. Like, this thing is such a radical experiment that we can't predict the outcomes. And because we can't predict the outcomes, nobody will fund it. We have no guarantees. And then he pushed back in his wisdom and said, but you can predict one outcome. It was like any experiment, the reason you do it is to learn. Because the learnings of this experiment are going to be on the edge of what's possible. So who cares about that? We started brainstorming and realized that today's multinational organizations would really care about figuring out what the next technologies are in these emerging markets. And so he was like, well, let's just call somebody. And I said, well, how much are we going to charge them to be a partner? And he goes, how much do we need? I said, well, about $600,000. He goes, well, let's do 3 partners. Let's ask them for about $250,000 each. And I'm like, okay. And I feel really uncomfortable with this. He goes, just call somebody. And so I pick up the phone. This is like what happened, literally. I pick up the phone and I call a friend at Nokia, and she's head of business development. Her job's to think 6 years in front of the company. I call her and I said, hey, here's what we're doing. It's a really radical experiment. I have about 5 minutes with her on the phone. And I said, but we have this new form of partnership. We're going to call it Learning Partners. We're looking for 3 multinational organizations to actually buy a room on the ship and to participate in this voyage with us with the belief that innovation is contagious, right? Do you want to do it? And Lisa goes, well, how much does it cost? I said, $250,000. And she goes, yeah. And she goes, okay, I'll call you back. And she hangs up. And she's a friend. And she literally hangs up the phone. And so I kind of take the phone away, and George is like, how did it go? And I was like, she hung up on me. This is not good. And so we start to reevaluate it because we're like, this is never going to work. And 10 minutes later, I get a phone call. I pick it up, and it's Lisa from Nokia. And she goes, we want a room on the ship. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, Lisa, how could you make such a big decision so quickly with such little information? And she goes, look, stop calling your participants entrepreneurs. They're not entrepreneurs. They're futurists. They're solving problems we didn't think were solvable in markets we don't think of as markets with technologies that we didn't know exist. If Nokia wants to have a chance in hell at staying ahead of the curve, we need to be immersed in that. And I was like, whoa, yes. But anyways, the irony is actually Nokia didn't partner because we didn't have enough time, right? We had a month and a half, so they couldn't move it quickly. But we ran with the model anyways, and we were very fortunate to partner with these 3 organizations, SAP, Xbox, their gaming division, and then the Nike Foundation. And they sailed with us around the world. We actually, when we got on the ship, we didn't actually have the funds from 2 of these partners. And so we stepped on the ship still terrified that it would never work. I know I'm running out of time, so I'll go really quickly. This is probably the juice of it, though, which is what did we actually learn from this experience? Everybody asked me what was my favorite country. There was no favorite country. It was an experience between two countries, though. And that was Singapore to Myanmar, because the juxtaposition was wild. Right? You had Singapore, wealthiest GDP per capita in the world. You had Myanmar, the second poorest country on earth. And we sailed between them right after each other. The reason I loved that experience is we were interacting with the startup communities in both countries. What was amazing is both were just as vibrant. Both of them had the same palpable energy and desire to solve their own problems, and their entrepreneurs were on fire. And what I realized is that today I think we're seeing a shift in capitalism, and it's falling into the hands of the individual and into the entrepreneur, because we're empowered to do it. And I feel like there's an entrepreneurial renaissance around the world. It feels like weeds pushing through concrete. It doesn't matter where in the world you are, they're everywhere. But what we also realize, and this was the insight, is that policy shapes the conditions in which creativity and entrepreneurship can flourish. And there's a big difference between Singapore and Myanmar in terms of policy. And I think that's why they have such stark differences in their GDP. That was supposed to be policy. So what we ended up doing, though, we realized this, right? We get out of Myanmar and we're like, holy heck, policy actually matters. We've kind of ignored government our whole lives as entrepreneurs. And so we teamed up with the State Department and we launched an event called Unreasonable at State. This was the culmination of the experience. We built this event while we were sailing. It really didn't seem like it'd work. The State Department was so sketched out by calling something unreasonable at state. And this is when John Kerry got into department, and he was one of the first things he was going to do was axe kind of the name of it. And we said, no, we got to call it what it is. It's really unreasonable. And so when we got to Barcelona, we got on a plane, we flew to Washington, D.C., and we brought together global policymakers who could rethink policy around solving hard problems. Really quickly, the last two insights. This is probably the most important insight that we gained. Unreasonable. There's a small group of us in Boulder who started Unreasonable, and this was our way to try to put a very small dent on global poverty. We realized that it's not going to be us. We need to empower the people on the front lines, the entrepreneurs who are doing it. Today, I believe that if we're actually going to have a chance in hell at putting a dent on global poverty, we have to focus on the 600 million girls specifically living in poverty today. This is the idea of the girl effect, spearheaded by the Nike Foundation. We got really close with them on the ship, and they opened my eyes to a very different belief. So we're now launching a program. We kind of have a bias towards action. So we're launching 3 companies out of this experience. One of them is a program that will bring together companies that are sustainably benefiting girls in poverty, use that as an insight engine in terms of what works on the ground, and help them hit scale faster. The second company that we're launching is based around investment. I'll go really quick, which is this is from the CIA, so it's biased, but it's still showing the darker the color, the faster the GDP is growing. And this is in 2010. Today, it's actually radically different. 10 fastest growing GDPs on Earth, 7 are in Africa. What's really interesting about investment today is that you can't invest how we invest here into companies coming out of Africa, right? The laws of liquidity are very, very different there. So we're launching an investment fund dedicated to figuring out how do we invest into companies like the ones I was talking about earlier, do so in a way that benefits the companies, helps them scale, and that the investors can sustainably get their money back. Right now, you can't invest into the types of companies that I just talked about, and there's something very scary about that. So we're going to start experimenting ourselves. The last thing we decided to launch was a production company, what these guys are doing, because we realized that the power of narrative is so unbelievably important, that these stories aren't being told, and that we need to start telling them. The very last thing, and then I promise I'll stop, is I think we realized what we always believed, but now we're kind of obsessed with, which is this idea that business, yeah, it's business, but really business is people. Right? It's about relationships. It's the most important thing. And we stepped off the ship, and our core value now is we is greater than I. We're trying to be pathologically collaborative with absolutely everything, and to be immersed in communities like this one. So in closing, I guess I don't actually need to do this. This was my email, but it's up on the little thing. But I just wanted to say that my proposal's submitted. I'm 100% here for the rest of this time, and I'm so excited about being here with all of you, so thank you so much.